morning, everyone. Arthur here with the M Disaster Gaming, and I am here today with the awesome Dr. Rick White. Rick here is going to tell us all about his career. He's had a unique career, and I'd also love to hear his 9/11 story because he's done some cool things. But one really cool story he's going to share with us today is the inside story about the button. And if you're not familiar with the button, this is the button that would inspire the movie Wargames, 1983, starring Matthew Broderick, and a whole bunch of things to come after that. So, and then lastly, we're going to talk about wargaming and future threats and potential geopolitical conflict on the horizon. So, over to you, Rick. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Rick White, and I'm retired Air Force and retired professor, and currently spending time with my wife and grandchildren, traveling and enjoying life. And Arthur here has invited me today to come and share some of my past experience as part of my Air Force life. And so I guess the topic of today's discussion is what Arthur has called the button, which is this item right here. This is the power on button to the NORAD computer system that in the late 1970s, early 1980s started acting up. And yes, it became an inspiration for the movie Wargames, primarily because of the concern it did by giving a false indication that the United States was under nuclear attack by then Soviet Union. So how did I come by this object? Well, it's an interesting story in my Air Force experience, in as much that I have the I have the record of working my way backwards through the Air Force. I started at the Pentagon working on, and I ended up at the Air Force Academy. And my very first assignment at the Pentagon, I was working on the then Joint Cruise Missile shared by both the Air Force and the Navy. The Air Force had a land variant. Of course, the Navy could fire theirs from ships and submarines. And I worked on software maintenance for the mission planning system, and that was out of the United States Navy Yard in South Washington, D.C. It was kind of unusual back in 1983 for a lieutenant to be assigned to the Pentagon. And so I was called in by our senior commander who wanted to meet the new guy. And that was Lieutenant General Winston Powers. And it was a very significant event in my life, because up until that time, I'd spent 4 years in ROTC, where a captain was pretty much God, and this guy above God. So I was pretty nervous when I met him, to say the least. And he was very friendly, very affable, and he helped put me at ease by asking me questions about my past and my background. And while I was talking to him, I noticed on the corner of his desk a little black paperweight cube, plastic cube, that encased a computer chip inside it. He saw me looking at that paperweight, that cube with the computer chip. And he asked me, he said, do you know what that is? And I said, no, sir, I don't. He said, well, that's the computer chip that almost started World War III. I said, really? He said, yes. And that was the computer chip inside the NORAD computer system that went bad in the 1980 and started sending out spurious bits indicating that the U.S. was under missile attacks by the Soviet Union. Fortunately, cooler heads prevailed, and we did not retaliate or flush the bombers, as the expression went in the movie Wargames. And he happened to be working here in Colorado Springs at the time, and when he left that assignment and moved on to the Pentagon, they handed that chip encased in the cube for him to take as a souvenir of the computer that almost started World War III. Well, it turns out that about the time that happened, a couple of producers in Hollywood wanted to put together a movie about a hacker who got into the Pentagon computers, and although he was only looking to play a war game, he almost started World War III. And they were trying to sell this at a time when personal computing, video gaming were still rather new. And their bosses back in Hollywood weren't certain that the story would sell, that it would be realistic. No one believed that a kid could cause the Pentagon to panic. And so he was starting to doubt the storyline, and it went through several major revisions. And the producer was Lawrence Lasker. And one day he asked himself, is this realistic? Can we sell this? Will this actually make a good movie? And he turned on the TV, and Walter Cronkite came on and gave the news that the Pentagon had been fooled, that it was under attack by the Soviet Union. In this case, it was a different incident. They had put the simulation tape with a full-out nuclear scenario onto the live system, and they had reacted. And so when Lasker saw that news broadcast, he turned off the TV, turned to his partner, and said, come on, let's get to work. We're on the right track.
Right. Wow, what timing.
The movie Wargames featured a young Matthew Broderick, and it went on to get 3 Academy Award nominations, and it made $120 million on a $12 million budget. So, it went on to do a lot more. It became, in addition to a cult classic, if you will, it also became the inspiration for the first U.S. cybersecurity laws. In 1984, as a result of the impetus from the movie Wargames, Congress passed the Cybersecurity Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And that's the basis for most cybersecurity laws today. It basically says it's unlawful to break into another computer that's not yours. Originally, the law was written for government computers, but it's since been interpreted by courts for all computers. So that's the basis today of most cybersecurity law in this country. So it had an impact beyond entertainment value. So anyway, fast forward 14 years in my career, I was now a major. I was assigned to Cheyenne Mountain here in Colorado Springs. And one of my first task, was to remove the now defunct older NORAD computer system from the mountain. It had been replaced by a slightly newer system that was up and operating, and now it was time to take out the old one. Now, I had heard that they might put it in a museum. I had also heard that they might just throw it on the scrap heap. A lot of equipment goes out for reutilization and ends up in the garbage dump. So as they were hauling out the pieces of the equipment, they started to pull out the operator console. And the operator console is what turned on and turned off the computer systems. They were Honeywell 6080s is what they were. And big, heavy iron, what we used to call mainframes at the time. And they were all controlled from this one operator console. And so, as they started to lift that up and take that out, I leaned over and I popped out the button, if you will, the power on button. And that is the button that powered on the computer that almost started World War III back in the late 70s, early 80s. So I did not achieve the stratospheric heights of General Powers, but like him, I came away from my Air Force career with a souvenir of the button of the computer that almost started World War III, and thank goodness it didn't. So that's my story on the button.
That's awesome. Wow. Very interesting history. And you've had, I mean, you really have a unique career. As you said, you started backwards and reversed the Pentagon, to serving later. And, with that, I think really, I have this running question. How else have you seen the influence from this event kind of traverse and lead into future planning and scenarios and wargaming today? What are your thoughts on its lasting legacy?
Well, the lasting legacy from that incident in Cheyenne Mountain was, first of all, they learned not to put simulation tapes on a live system. And so the Air Force invested $12 million to develop a separate development and test facility to facilitate software maintenance of the NORAD computer system, but it was separate from the live system. So
that was a smart lesson learned there.
Yeah, you don't want to scare everybody into World War III. As I said, the incident did raise awareness and concerns about the effects of where our society was headed at the time of computer controls. And that incident preceded 9/11 by 20 years, and but they're related in the following respect. Before 9/11 happened, there was an attack on the Tokyo subway system in 1995. And that is the first incident that got the United States thinking about the subject, what we today call Homeland Security. And what subject caught everybody's attention was that up until that time, only nature and nations could create large-scale catastrophes. Nature in the form of hurricanes, earthquakes, disasters, and nations in the form of warfare.
Anytime, summer 1940. A Britain standing alone, yet learning with each dawn new lessons on how to go on as though nothing was happening. London is an open city, a city open for battle. Isn't that the tea train coming around? So wake up, Mrs. Higgins of Bethnal Green. Tea's up, ducks. Drink it while it's nice and hot. Fire and flame, death and destruction. Sleep on, Mrs. Higgins. You'll need all your strength for tomorrow. Any morning after in London, or is it Coventry, Bristol, Portsmouth, Liverpool, Belfast, Birmingham, Plymouth, or Glasgow? There goes your neighbor, Mrs. Higgins. And me speaking to her only yesterday. Yesterday was, well, yesterday, Mrs. Higgins. Yesterday was the old order of things. Today is different, just as tomorrow will be different, because it has to be. Yet with each dawn's fresh havoc, wonderful how habit survives. It's hard to kill the regular life of a great city. Hard to kill the habit of after work in the morning. But what unfamiliarity to be found on your too familiar journey. Holes where there were no holes yesterday. No houses where yesterday's houses. Broken mains squirting water, sewage, gas or fire. Under one's feet, the crunch of shattered glass, like walking on a pebbly beach. No wonder I couldn't get a number 15 this morning.
And they could quite literally, with nuclear weapons, lay waste to the planet. But that power was vested with nations, not individuals. And the 1995 Tokyo subway attacks demonstrated otherwise. There's a class of weapons that we call weapons of mass destruction, and they typically include CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear. And up until that time, those types of weapons were well within the purview of nations. It required the resources of a nation to develop. Well, guess what? Aum Shirinkyo, a Japanese cult, they created their own WMD in the form of sarin gas. And sarin is a very deadly compound. Only a single drop is enough to kill an individual. And they had created enough that they dropped about 6 packets full, I don't know how many liters, couple of liters full in the Tokyo subway systems in March, I think it was 1995. And they punctured those bags, and their aim was to kill thousands of people. And they initiated the attack in the Tokyo subway system for 2 reasons. One, in the confines of that space, to concentrate the liquid so it would have the greatest effect. But 2, they did it during rush hour, during the height when most of the commuters would be government workers. Their intent was to topple the Japanese government. And so fortunately, they did not achieve their goals in any respect. I think 12 people died that day, not the thousands that could have, even though 5,000 people reported to hospitals. Only 12 died, fortunately. And of course, the Japanese government didn't topple. They were arrested, and it took about 20 years before they met their justice and were executed in Japan. But that incident caught the attention of governments around the world that individuals, what are called non-state actors, could now wield the power of WMD. And it got the U.S. government talking under the Clinton administration in how are we ourselves, the United States, potentially vulnerable to a similar attack. And because it occurred on the Tokyo subway system, they created a commission, they created a panel, the president, the White House did, to look into the vulnerability of our critical infrastructure. And they were the first ones in their report to identify that the U.S. was rapidly incorporating a lot of computer controls that were remotely operated, and that was creating a vulnerability to in our infrastructure that one day it could be attacked and create massive problems unlike any that had ever been seen before.
3,402 people died on 0 day.
Absolute nationwide terror.
Computer systems completely hijacked.
A significant number of casualties.
Every phone in America displayed the same haunting message. This will happen again.
And today we live under that threat of a cyber attack on something like the national electric grid. So back to the incident in Cheyenne Mountain, that foreshadowed potential and is related to what happened after the Tokyo subway attacks in looking at how our country might become vulnerable. And sure enough, here we are today in the midst of the threat of cyber attack, and how that is different than 9/11 itself. Is that 9/11 was a devastating attack that ended up killing 3,000 people and causing $40 billion of direct damages, not including the trillions that were spent on the wars in the decades afterwards in Afghanistan and Iraq. But 9/11 itself, as bad as it was just a regional attack. New York, Washington, D.C., Arlington, Virginia. A cyber attack could conceivably be mounted nationwide. And the U.S. has not suffered a nationwide attack since the Civil War. And a nationwide attack could be significantly worse than anything that's ever happened to the country in any other war since the Civil War. By the way, more Americans died in the Civil War than any of our other wars combined, 620,000. So it could be a very bad day. So that's how they're kind of related. That's kind of my interest. My PhD is in security engineering, basically homeland security. But along the way, and as part of my responsibilities and part of my procedures, I did myself get into wargaming. So, that's another story I can share, or, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. First, though, it's really fascinating history to hear how these events over time would go on to seed, decades or generations of kind of thought for how things would develop. Everything from tracing back to this incident to homeland security to the nexus to critical infrastructure protection, and how it kind of comes full circle with, looking at critical infrastructure protection really reveals these kind of how all these things are interconnected across that nexus. So, but very fascinating. I think so few people understand kind of the history of how these things, kind of unfold. And most people don't understand or realize that many of these things come from military, from DoD experiences that kind of traverse, history and feed into Homeland Security Emergency Management as we know it today. But really, really interesting, really eye-opening story, and very realistic kind of failures. You could very easily see how this event, the event at Cheyenne Mountain, could lead to fears of things like Y2K, right? The Y2K incident with people afraid, oh no, the clocks are not going to roll back, so we're at risk of failures of key pieces of critical infrastructure that may reset or cause national failures. So, but very, very kind of interesting to see how these things kind of evolved over time, and where those threats or those fears come from, the origins. But yes, absolutely. So you'd mentioned 9/11. So I actually do want to ask, so where were you serving during 9/11? You want to briefly mention that, because that was also another posting of yours. Yeah, you were serving at the time.
So after my assignment at Cheyenne Mountain, I wanted my family to stay in Colorado Springs because my daughters were in high school at Rampart. And so I felt the only way I could do that was to go on a remote assignment. So I volunteered for Saudi Arabia and got the United States Air Force Academy. So typical military logic. Okay. So I ended up in the 50th Education Squadron, which was teaching cadets their military courses, what was equivalent to what I was taught in ROTC. Obviously, cadets get a lot more, but these were the courses, and I was assigned. They took these courses as freshmen and seniors, and as freshmen, we teach them about the Air Force and aircraft and fly, fight, win, yay, go Air Force. And as seniors, we say, oh, by the way, there's these things called the Army, Navy, and Marines that you also have to work with, and this is how we work with them. And so I was teaching the cadets their senior military course, and I was into my second year, and I was teaching the morning class, began at 8:30, and as was typical, we'd get into the classroom, and the instructors would get in the classroom 8 o'clock, and we'd turn on CNN to watch the news. And the cadets started trickling in for their class, and all of a sudden CNN came on and said an airplane just crashed into the, I believe it was the North Tower was the first one that was hit. And, here's the footage. And, everybody was stunned. We were watching smoke come out of the building and live shots. And, aircraft had flown into tall buildings before. A B-17, I think it was, maybe a B-24 had flown into the Empire State Building and in the 1940s. And so that was not a big deal. And so until about 15 minutes later, CNN showed the live footage of second aircraft going into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. And so I then turned to my class. I said, we are now at war. This is a concerted attack, and things are going to change. And sure enough, I shut down the Air Force Academy. It was the last week I ever got to park in front of my office. They moved all the parking further out, and it was a hike from there on in from the remainder of my 3 years, which was not a bad thing. I could use the exercise. That's how I got that's where I was. I was teaching cadets on 9/11 as we saw it happen live. After that happened, it became a question in my mind. Well, if we have a Department of Defense, why do we need a Department of Homeland Security? And that drove my PhD dissertation into what is Homeland Security and why do we need it. And it basically is the difference between national security and Homeland Security and emergency management. In national security, it's geared towards nation states and nation state competitors. And it has the advantage that we use our nuclear forces and other conventional capabilities as a deterrent. And with the, we still stand by the deterrent philosophy of you hit us, we'll hit you back, but we'll hit you harder. Okay, it's a Mexican standoff. But it only works with nation states unless they're crazy. And
They have to be logical actors that understand the ramifications. Yeah.
And this gets into game theory. Okay. But in Homeland Security, you're dealing with non-state actors that now have the ability to create catastrophic destruction, whereas before the Tokyo subway attacks, that didn't exist. There was always concern about them getting hold of a loose nuke. And there were movies long before 9/11, including True Lies with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis, where they explore that scenario.
All right, let's get these aircraft on the ground, gentlemen. We got a nuclear bomb going off in about 1 minute.
Any minute now.
All right, I know.
Go.
All right, everybody, it's showtime. Do not look at the flash. Do not look at the flash. Get down over there.
We should be safe here. This is the wrong finger.
So it came as a surprise when 19 hijackers turned passenger aircraft into guided missiles by subverting our critical infrastructure and used our critical infrastructure in a physical manner in a kinetic attack. Now, other forms of kinetic attack are concerning by non-state actors, and cyber attack is a big one because it doesn't take a lot of resources. You don't even have to be in the U.S. It can be done from anywhere in the world. An emerging threat in the last 5 years is a drone swarm attack. Similar deal. Doesn't take a lot of resources. You don't have to be in the U.S. to mount one, and it can be targeted against electric grid or communications or even military sites.
And very low cost. I mean, looking at the Ukraine war, originally it was defense drones, but then eventually, as the supply dwindled, the Ukrainian military innovated, and they bought commercially available drones off the shelf for cheap, for like the $50, $100 ones you can buy with GoPros, as long as they could carry a weight or explosive that could be remotely triggered, and have turned those into weapons now, like that. They're really effective.
They're accurate up to 2,000 miles with a 2 kilogram warhead. And that can do a lot if it targets the right item, such as an oil refinery. But looking closer to home, transnational criminal organizations.
The cartels, in particular, have recently actually been using drones against Border Patrol, which is interesting to see the technological innovation there. And the swarm concept is actually really easy because we use it commercially for fireworks, 4th of July, for example, or Christmas. It's actually become very common to see drone swarms to perform maneuvers, right?
So, unfortunately, there are ways. So, Homeland Security is about safeguarding the U.S. from domestic catastrophic destruction. And that can take place from non-state actors including humans and nature, okay? But also within the realm of civil defense, it could be in a nuclear war. So, so 9/11 got me interested in Homeland Security, and from the very start, I've been a researcher and a professor in Homeland Security, using my software engineering background as well to help with cybersecurity, look into stuff about cybersecurity. But and I'm still not done. We just published with HS Today an article in I think it was September about the next 25 years and looking at some of these threats. And we've expanded on that with an academic paper that's now being reviewed. So hopefully that will come out, looking at how we got to where we are and what we might need to change going forward from here to make us safer. Understanding.
Sorry, to interject, as you say, it was a very enlightening paper, because there have only been two papers I would say published nationally, particularly in Homeland Security today. One was satirical or satire in terms of how AI might run amok, and privatization of EM or Homeland Security could occur. Not very realistic, but kind of an interesting thought exercise. Whereas the paper you wrote with Stan Sapinski was actually very interesting, because you kind of follow this lineage or this history, and then you thoughtfully think out, so where do we go from here, given the context of this, given the context of reorganization, and change on its face isn't bad, particularly in Homeland Security or even civil defense, as you're aware. In our previous research on civil defense, there's so much change and reorganization. It's like the federal government can never truly, find either a home or a structure or a posture that really worked. And maybe that gives credence to the fact that the threat spectrum is always changing, and maybe just the model has to change as we evolve. But it was a very interesting paper.
So how does this tie me into wargaming besides the movie Wargames? I used to introduce myself by saying, I would tell my class, I say, guess what I have in common with Matthew Broderick? And it got to the point I said, you're both old, fat, and irrelevant.
That's terrible.
That's when I decided to retire from teaching. But anyway, besides the movie Wargames, I got into wargaming. In fact, I actually had the title of Chief of Wargames.
Oh wow, that's awesome!
And this was my office indicator right there when I was in the Air Force. I got into there I am.
Yep.
Okay, I got into wargames because of a good friend of mine, a colleague at the Air Force Academy named Jay Billups, a very smart person. And he noticed that that cadets weren't responding well to the traditional teaching methods. And that's called the sage on the stage. And that's when you stand in front of the classroom and you drone on, typically about war stories. And of course, people like me, into my career and looking back at when I was a cadet and looking at them, that this is what you really want to know, and giving them these pearls of wisdom, just having them drop on the floor in front of them because they didn't know enough to pick them up, and quite frankly, they didn't care enough. to pick them up because they were beaten mercilessly. It's a fact of the Air Force Academy, and I don't know about the other service academies, but we take young, promising freshmen who want nothing more than to fly, fight, and win, and beat that enthusiasm out of them so that by the time they're seniors, all they want to do is tell me what I need to do to get out of here. And it leads to a situation called the 5 and dive. After they've done their 5 years, they're out of the Air Force if they can do it. Though, I mean, they're good. They're good officers. They're good cadets. They go through a rigorous program, and unfortunately, it's just we can't do that for all our officers. But it just beats the enthusiasm out of them. So we had to find a new way of teaching. And Jay Billups, none of us. He was another computer science background. None of us were professional educators, but we had experience. And he's decided to use games in the classroom to get the cadets involved. And they had a lot of advantages. The cadets didn't have to read, so you didn't have a classroom full of zombies, everybody trying to avoid taking questions because they didn't read the assignment. They got to participate, they got to act, and based on the action in the classroom, they could draw lessons. The debriefing after the game was the important part, which is, okay, so what did we just observe here? And this is how Wargames got started in our classroom, in our classes teaching cadets. And as an example, one of the freshman classes learning about the Air Force is what's the importance of tankers? Who wants to fly a tanker? Okay, well, we could talk about the KC-135 and the advantage it gives to all importance of tankers, who are fleet in extending its range. But it's much more interesting to go out onto the quad, the terrazzo at the Air Force Academy, and be given a milk jug, a gallon jug filled with water. And then you're told, as soon as I say go, turn that jug upside down and see how far you can run. Go. And the cadets would turn the jug upside down and they would run as far as they could until the jug was empty. And that gave them an idea of how far they could go. Then what Jay would do is send somebody out to that point and they say, you're the tanker, and give them 2 milk jugs. And they would he'd go back to that first cadet and say, now, this time I want you to run out to that tanker and refill your jug and then see how far you can go. And they quickly learn they can double their range. And that's a lot more interesting.
Very effective, very effective form of teaching. Yes, yeah.
The commandant, the 1-star, he happened to be looking out his window one day when that was going on, and he found it intriguing, and he ended up on the terrazzo, and he asked, Captain Billups, what are you doing? He says, we're teaching the cadets about tankers, and he thought it was fantastic. That was General Mark Welsh, who was a gentleman and a scholar, truly an inspirational commander. So anyway, Jay Billups got us into it, and we started looking at, how can we incorporate more of this stuff into the classroom? And Jay was a big fan of StarCraft.
Yes.
And so we started off with the freshmen building StarCraft scenarios. And we after we taught them the basics of how to play StarCraft, we used the mechanics of StarCraft to build scenarios where we were conducting different types of warfare in different parts of the world. And then we were giving the cadets real military briefings, and we were having them fight against computer scenarios and then building up to fighting against each other. And we saw the results of that. And we said, how can we build a course that's completely based on the wargaming? And my last, just before I retired, my last project, we turned the senior level course into a Wargames based course using Empire Earth, because Empire Earth allowed us to build scenarios using actual geographic data for parts of the world, and then real equipment that we could do, and over time. So we introduced the cadets, we built them, took them through the history of ground warfare, naval warfare, air warfare, and then started having them play scenarios against the computer, scenarios against each other, and then teaming. And the whole thing ended with a competition. And it was a heck of a lot more interesting than the sage on the stage. Now we're the guides on the side. And it took a lot of work to develop the scenarios and to set them up. But once you did that, the learning proceeded by itself. You just had to stand by, and they learned a lot. And as if to emphasize that, 10 years later, I was on a hike up behind the Air Force Academy, going up Stanley Canyon, and came across these two former cadets who happened to be hiking, and here they are 10 years later. And I asked them if they remembered anything about that class, and they said, yeah, I just remembered the B2 was pretty cool. So they had memories of playing. They weren't just games, they were lessons that they learned. So I am convinced, and ever since that time, when I taught at university elsewhere, after I retired, I incorporated games, and I used them for not just military scenarios, but emergency management. And for a brief period, for 3 years, when I worked at Northcom as a contractor, we developed scenarios for them for tabletop exercises, and so a couple of functional exercises. But the difference between just doing versus sitting there and listening, it's a huge difference. And students everywhere react much better to doing than just listening. So I'm sold on Wargames.
Absolutely, that's awesome. And so outside of that, you've so after you retired from the Air Force and from being a professor of military education at the Air Force Academy, you go on and you actually have worked quite a bit in Homeland Security emergency management, facilitating different types of exercises, but also continuing to develop war games that kind of cross the spectrum. So the application's really unique, and I know you've also published on some of that. If you'd share just a little bit about that.
So I started teaching with community colleges, and they were all developing Homeland Security courses that were tied in with their emergency management at the time. And this was before I started my PhD and started figuring out, well, what is Homeland Security exactly? So I was writing textbooks about Homeland Security, which were very good on what was being done in the name of Homeland Security, but still a lot of people were asking, well, what's the difference between Homeland Security and emergency management? Okay, is it about hurricanes or is it about terrorists? And what's the difference between Homeland Security and counterterrorism, which is what the FBI, that's their job. Okay, so like I said, safeguarding U.S. from domestic catastrophic destruction. Okay, it's about the effect, not the cause. That's what it's about. So to do this from the very start, we could do exercises. The Empire Earth course that we did for the cadets was perhaps the pinnacle of technological sophistication for me. I've done exercises with spreadsheets, and I prefer to go low tech because low tech is much more portable. And so that's why, the board game that you develop is brilliant, because people can everywhere can relate to that. You don't have
the mechanics are, everyone's played a board game of some type in their lifetime, and they can generally pick up the mechanics very easy. It's low cost. It's not software. It's not because when you get into full software, you get into full simulation realm, and that's a whole different type of exercise. But and also, I think there are generations or folks who are deterred by video games
Still are.
are 100%
There still
computer
are.
games. And
There still
that's
are.
just, yeah. There are a lot of folks that are like that. So
They're not exactly Luddites, but it scares them. But here's the other thing that I learned. I use a lot of computer or poker chips in my games. I use a lot of poker chips. And something that I've observed, and I could probably write a psychology paper on this, is people get possessive of those chips. And it's not just chips. It's anything that has a tactile sense to it. They become possessive, and that engages them more into the game. And that's where I get to start playing with their minds,
Right.
which is
Well,
the
and it's
fun part.
fascinating because then you extrapolate that and you think you abstract that on a bigger scale. This is now a nation. This is a national resource. This is an asset that is being sought after by 5 other countries. Are we willing to fight for it, or are we going to let it go? Right? That's when it gets real. I think some really interesting thought.
The other thing I learned in the games is have as few rules as possible. And the early games I did that had some kind of military competition, they always wanted to go nuclear at some point. And we tried to avoid that. So I later on developed games where you could go nuclear, because there was an important lesson in that. One of the games, it was a spreadsheet game, but it was scalable. We played it up to 100 people, and we divided them into their own countries. And they used poker chips as resources that they could develop. And the objective was, we simulated 10 years, 10 rounds in this game. And at the end of 10 years, whichever country had the greatest GDP, gross domestic product, won. Okay, you're the superpower of the world. And but they could get there by developing their economy, their military. And they chose, and then to teach the cyber aspect of it, they had invisible chips that were cyber, and they could mount cyber attacks. And the cool thing about the invisible chip, which was they didn't have a chip, but was that it replicated the fact that in a cyber attack, you didn't know who attacked you. Okay. And that was very frustrating to the people who got attacked. And the people who could attack, that was one of the cheapest options of impacting another nation. Anyway.
Well, it's very relevant because you think of the movie A House of Dynamite, and
I always thought just being ready is the point. It keeps the villain in check. Keeps the world straight. They see how prepared we are. No one starts a nuclear war.
Approximately 3 minutes ago, we detected an ICBM over the Pacific. Current flight trajectory is consistent with impact somewhere in the continental United States.
Have we seen that country before? No.
Is this real?
STRATCOM is asking for launch instructions right now. I'm gonna need you to breathe.
We are talking about hitting a bullet with a bullet.
So it's a fucking coin toss? That's what $50 billion buys us?
Get in the car and just start driving.
If we do not take steps to neutralize our enemies now, we will lose our window to do so.
If we get this wrong, none of us are going to be alive tomorrow.
There is no plan B.
We did everything right? We did every fucking thing right.
None of this makes sense. Making all these bombs and all these plans. The walls are just ready to blow.
one of the things that the big kind of dilemmas, the moral challenges that they face is who do we retaliate against? We don't know if it's a sea-based attack from Korea, or we know it's from this trajectory, but we didn't see who actually launched it. Was it from Korea or was it from China? The implications of who we retaliate against is significant. Right.
And I just saw that movie, and I'll come back to that. It was very realistic, except for one crucial point. Where's the CIA? That's their job to tell you.
Yes, they know.
Now, in a cyber attack, even the CIA couldn't tell you. Okay, but in a missile attack, the CIA's got to know, because that's why they were created. But anyway, all right. But back to this option of nuking. So in cyber nations, they can build their forces, and a couple of countries decided to go rogue, and they built their military. And they wanted to attack other countries. And here's what they found out. Here's the problem with going rogue. The other countries will band up against you. And that was the important lesson that we wanted them to see. And we didn't create any rules about that. We didn't even talk about international relations and politics.
But the natural tendency to do that, that's very fascinating, right? To see how that forms. You think about the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon went rogue, and then the countries that were once on his side banded together and fought back and won, right? Waterloo. Very, very fascinating to kind of see that play out. And it does make a very good, it speaks to, I think, the benefits of more free adjudication than rigid games where it's very narrow. I can understand the purpose of rigid games when you're trying to teach a particular lesson, but in kind of a bigger thought exercise, the ability to have more free availability to make decisions is definitely allows for, I would think, more innovation, or the ability to do things that people didn't perceive before, right? So that's very fascinating.
If you saw the movie Midway, they had the part in there where they're wargaming the attack on Pearl Harbor, or excuse me, not Pearl Harbor, but on Midway.
Yep.
And the junior officers came up with a concept of, what if they know where we are? And of course, the admiral was like, no, the rules say.
南雲中将、そんなことで図上演習ができるのか。この若い将軍は戦闘競技を無視するものですから、自分は長官の作戦計画通り、そして米軍が真珠湾から撃って出ると同時に我々のこの空母を差し向けたというわけです。それで
米軍の部隊は真珠湾から向かったのではなく、ミッドウェイの北東で待ち伏せしていたのです。機動部隊がミッドウェイを爆撃している隙に、米軍は日本軍の空母を3隻。
米軍が我々の作戦行動を読んでいない限り、そのような攻撃はありえんだろう。もう一度やり直した。だが今度は敵の空母を真珠湾から派遣するように。はっ。
Can't do that.
But you don't know, because in war they may know. I mean, that's the thing. And
that wasn't that. There are more recent historical equivalents to that. I forget what exercise it was, but the OPFOR, the opposing force, after their networks were wiped out, they were able to still communicate because they went to couriers. And they said, you can't do that. Well, they did. And so...
that's how Al-Qaeda operate, right? They switched. So when we hit back right away, they lost most of their infrastructure, and they did switch to couriers. We know that Al-Qaeda, to when they were communicating, particularly with their high-level commanders, they knew if they got on radios or technology, we could find them. But couriers was a different network in the system that made it much harder to track them down, right? So
yeah. So Wargames are great. Admiral Nimitz the pioneers in wargaming in the United States. If you read Perla's book, was the Naval War Center in Connecticut. Is it?
CNA, the Center for Naval
War College. Naval War College. And I want to say it's in Groton, Connecticut, but anyway, gosh, you're dredging up decades worth of memories here.
Well, you know what's funny is we still, as far as I know, everyone still uses Perla's book, Dr. Perla, as he preferred, for teaching. Even for disaster wargaming, my upcoming Wargaming Academy that I'm developing to teach emergency managers and first responders how to use wargaming uses Perla's book, and the different academies still use Perla's book. So, I mean, it speaks to a man who invested his life, 40, 50 years of his career.
Well, yeah. Well, anyway, in talking about the Naval War College, Nimitz said, we wargamed. There was no, we wargamed everything we saw in World War II. The only surprise was the kamikaze.
Kamikazes, yeah.
That was the only surprise. So, that's the
also
advantage of wargaming.
The revelation of that is fascinating as well, to think that they were prepared and used wargaming so effectively to both lead to major wins in both the Atlantic and Pacific. So, yeah.
So anyway, I think I've bored your listeners enough. So,
well, thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us today, Rick. And for everyone who's watched here, I will post part of this episode and in the links to Rick's book, which actually, when I was going to school in college, I actually had read Rick's book on Homeland Security back in my day. So it was a kind of a seminal book. On the cusp of what is Homeland Security back in the day, and his recent publication about the future, where do we go, and some of his other work. And then I also want to say thank you for partnering with us. So we have our digital gaming archive that actually features 35 games that Rick has developed over his career that we've adapted and are bringing to EM Disaster Gaming to make available to others. So for anyone interested, please check out the links at the end of this video. But to that, thank you so much for joining us today, Rick. Fascinating. I hope to have you back sometime. And just incredible history and context and the kind of lessons learned that you've shared with us. So fascinating. And really appreciate you sharing the button and telling the story, because that really was kind of a monumental point in time that would lead to future things. I mean, the cyber ramifications, and now cyber is an existential threat. So, but thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Take care.